They spent years waiting for him to die, not because they hated him, but every killing test imaginable.
If Greek children tried to think with him, then he gave him from his knowledge.
What he discovered over the next 30 days would shock the entire world. What he discovered over the next 30 days would shock the entire world.
For nearly 40 years, Richard Hale had built his company from nothing. At 68 years old, he was one of the most respected business leaders in America. His technology corporation employed thousands of people. His face appeared on magazine covers. His speeches filled auditoriums. To the outside world, Richard seemed to have everything: success, power, respect, money. But privately, he had one growing fear: his children. There was his oldest son, Michael, 42 years old, confident, charismatic, always dressed perfectly. Michael constantly talked about leadership and family values. Yet Richard often sensed something artificial behind the smile. Then there was his daughter, Vanessa, 39, elegant and intelligent. She had built a social media brand around philanthropy and luxury living. Millions admired her online. But Richard sometimes wondered whether she cared more about appearances than people. And finally, there was Ethan, the youngest, 34 years old, quiet, reserved, often overlooked. Unlike his siblings, Ethan never sought attention. But he had spent years struggling financially while refusing offers to work directly under his father's company. Richard loved all three of them. But lately, something felt wrong. Family dinners had become uncomfortable. Conversations always drifted toward investments, trust funds, properties, ownership stakes, the future of the company. Rarely did anyone ask how Richard was feeling. Rarely did anyone simply spend time with him. One evening, after another tense family gathering, Richard sat alone in his office. The room overlooked the city skyline. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Across from him sat his oldest friend and attorney, Samuel Pierce, the only person Richard trusted completely. Richard stared into the darkness outside, then quietly asked a question. If I died tomorrow, what do you think would happen? Samuel hesitated. You really want the truth? Richard nodded. Samuel sighed. I think they'd be devastated. A pause. For about 3 days. Richard looked down. The answer hurt because he already feared it was true. That night, an idea formed. A dangerous idea. One that most people would consider insane. But Richard needed answers. Real answers. Not carefully rehearsed family conversations. Not performances. Not public displays. He wanted the truth. And the truth only appeared when people believed nobody was watching. 2 months later, the world received shocking news. Richard Hale was dead. According to reports, a sudden storm had caused an accident during a solo sailing trip. Rescue teams recovered wreckage. Authorities declared him deceased. The media exploded. News stations interrupted broadcasts. Stock markets reacted instantly. Tributes poured in from around the globe. And at Richard's funeral, hundreds gathered to say goodbye. Hidden inside a surveillance room hundreds of miles away, Richard watched every second. His appearance had changed. Gray beard, glasses, different hairstyle. Even his closest relatives would never recognize him. Beside him sat Samuel. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from cameras placed throughout family properties and company offices. The test had begun. At first, everything seemed normal. Michael cried during his speech. His voice trembled. My father was my hero. Applause followed. Vanessa sobbed beside the casket. She spoke about love, family, legacy. Even Ethan appeared emotional. For a brief moment, Richard felt guilty. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe his children truly cared. Then the funeral ended, and the mask began to slip. The very next morning, Michael entered Richard's corporate headquarters. He walked directly into the executive conference room. Several board members waited. Michael didn't waste time. When do we discuss leadership transition? One board member looked surprised. Richard's funeral was yesterday. Michael leaned forward. And the company needs direction. Watching from the monitor, Richard felt his stomach tighten. Not once during the meeting did Michael discuss preserving his father's vision. Instead, he focused entirely on authority, control, power. By the end of the conversation, he had already begun campaigning to become CEO. Richard remained silent, but disappointment started growing. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. Vanessa hosted a private gathering at her mansion. The event wasn't about grief. It wasn't about remembrance. It was a celebration. Champagne flowed freely. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Guests laughed, danced, and toasted to new beginnings. At one point, a friend asked Vanessa a question. What happens now with the inheritance? Vanessa smiled. A very exciting future. Everyone laughed. Richard didn't. Watching the footage felt like being stabbed repeatedly. His daughter wasn't mourning. She was planning, calculating, anticipating wealth. But what happened next shocked him even more. Late one evening, Vanessa met privately with Michael. Hidden microphones captured every word. "Have you talked to Ethan?" she asked. Michael rolled his eyes. "He'll get his share." Vanessa lowered her voice. "We need to make sure he doesn't interfere." Richard sat forward. Michael smirked. "Ethan has never been ambitious." "Still," Vanessa replied, "people like him become dangerous when money gets involved." The room fell silent. Richard stayed at the screen. His own children were already discussing strategies against their brother. The inheritance hadn't even been distributed. Yet greed was already poisoning everything. Days passed. Then something unexpected happened. Something neither Richard nor Samuel anticipated. Ethan disappeared. For nearly 48 hours, nobody knew where he was. Michael didn't seem concerned. Vanessa barely mentioned him. But Richard became worried. Finally, investigators hired by Samuel located Ethan. And what they found stunned Richard. Ethan wasn't meeting lawyers. He wasn't negotiating assets. He wasn't plotting. Instead, he was visiting a small community center. The same center Richard had secretly funded for years. Inside the building, Ethan sat speaking with elderly residents. Many were crying. Some hugged him. Others shared stories about Richard. Then Ethan quietly revealed something. A week before Richard's supposed death, he had promised the center additional funding. Funding that now seemed impossible. Without hesitation, Ethan withdrew nearly all his personal savings, everything he had, and donated it. Samuel stared at Richard. Neither man spoke. Finally, Richard whispered, "He can't afford that." Samuel nodded. "I know." For the first time since the experiment began, Richard felt tears forming. Not because of money, because of sacrifice. Because someone had acted with genuine compassion when nobody was watching. And Ethan believed there would be no reward, no recognition, no inheritance advantage, only the chance to help people. The test continued, and soon the darkest discoveries emerged. One evening, Michael secretly met with a rival investor. Hidden cameras recorded everything. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end, Michael had agreed to sell significant portions of company ownership if he gained control. The investor smiled. "Your father would never approve." Michael laughed. "My father isn't here anymore." Richard froze. The words echoed through the room. "My father isn't here anymore." Not sadness, not respect, only opportunity. But the final betrayal was still coming, and it would change everything. 3 weeks into the experiment, Vanessa made a discovery. While reviewing legal documents, she learned something shocking. Richard's inheritance structure wasn't what she expected. The majority of his wealth remained locked inside trusts and charitable foundations. Immediate payouts were far smaller than anticipated. Vanessa exploded with rage. She screamed, destroyed furniture, accused lawyers of deception. Then she shouted a sentence Richard would never forget. "After everything I've waited for, this is all I get." Waited for. The words hit harder than any business failure, harder than any betrayal, because they revealed a horrifying truth. She had been waiting, waiting for him to die, waiting for access, waiting for wealth, not grieving a father, calculating an opportunity. Richard lowered his head, and for several minutes, he couldn't speak. The test was exposing everything, every hidden motive, every buried truth, every secret thought. But the biggest revelation still hadn't arrived, because Ethan was about to uncover something impossible, something that would lead him directly toward the truth, toward Richard, and toward a confrontation none of them were prepared for. Every story has a meaning, and every voice deserves to be heard. If you enjoy powerful storytelling, emotional journeys, and unforgettable narratives, make sure you subscribe to The Narrative and become part of our growing community. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And let us know in the comments your thoughts about the story and also what kind of stories you want to hear next. Share with loved ones and friends. Your next unforgettable story begins here on The Narrative.